Coming up on today's episode, we visit with Tobias Harris, Pistons forward, who thinks it's vital that the Pistons are playing downtown, how important the mentorship is that he has been able to embark on throughout his NBA career, why his team fell short this season, and what they're lacking. And later on, some of the greatest athletes who can't get over that proverbial hump, and what's holding them back. And are the Tigers in danger of being in that realm with teams like the Washington Capitals and the LA Clippers? And if so, who's to blame? That's coming up next on Shep, Shower, and Shave. Led the Pistons in scoring, the most consistent player for this Pistons club this past season. Tobias Harris joins us here on Shep, Shower, and Shave. Tobias, we appreciate it very much. Let's talk a little bit first about your season and how you grew as a player. In what area do you think you grew the most?
I think coming in from last season to this season, a big goal for me was just to be efficient in a lot of many spots and try to find different areas on the court where I can operate and make things happen. So that was an area where I thought that I got better at. And then going into the summer is something that I'm going to continue to work on and try to be even more efficient come next year.
Tobias, it seems playing in 82 games, a full season for the first time in your career was something that was very important to you. I know you suffered some lighter injuries earlier in your career, like ankle sprains, and that may have been frustrating to keep you out. What did you do in the offseason differently this past year that helped you get ready for this 82-game slate?
Just really got to focus in on my rest, my recovery, being able to still work at a high volume and get really good reps in, but at the same time taking care of all the things off the court. Really eating healthy. It's a whole package of things, but they all add up and they all affect the way you play and the energy that you bring when you're out there. So it was something for me, like you touched on in the beginning of my career, something that I had little nicks and knacks of injuries, a couple of sprains here and there. That was kind of disappointing. So I kind of just wanted to tap into that and really, fuel my body the right way so I could be as effective as I can.
Is there anyone that kind of piqued your interest in that area, or is that something you've been interested in for a while and kind of just now got around to really making the full-scale change, or maybe a veteran that mentioned to you an area where you could improve?
It's something that I, been around for a while, just understanding. At the same time, it's just being a learner of the game and knowing that, you have to, for myself, you have to put your body you have to do the right things for your body to get it to function the right way. So, everything's a learning curve, so I kind of learned from a lot of my past, dealings with in the NBA and, was able to use that to help me to where I'm at today.
It's interesting. You're from Islip, New York, but in talking with you since you've been in Detroit, New Yorkers have a certain type of reputation. You probably know that. You couldn't be further away from that type of reputation. How do you think that transpired, and is that kind of an unfortunate reputation that New Yorkers in general have?
Yeah, there's a type of reputation. And that's just the way it is. At the same time, I think for myself, I just try to worry about being the best that I can be and understand that this game that I play, it's my job, it's my profession. But at the same time, a lot comes with it. I was a kid growing up, and I was always inspired by a professional athlete, NBA players to be exact, and I know that that means a lot for me. So at the same time, it's kind of like my will to do the same and impact and make a difference.
What's the difference between coming off the bench and starting? You've been the ultimate team player in this organization and really in your stops in Milwaukee and Orlando as well, a willingness to do whatever it takes to help a team win. I've always viewed you as a starter. I don't suppose it matters who starts. It's really about who finishes, and you're on the floor at the end of the game, and that's probably the most important thing to you. But is there a different mindset? What is the biggest difference in starting and coming off the bench at a certain time?
Yeah, I think it is a different type of mindset. I think when you're a starter, you get yourself mentally prepared to go out there and start the game and help the team in the right way. When you come off the bench, it's a different type of, it's the same approach, but it's a different type of attitude where you have to evaluate what's going on the floor, Whereas you have to bring something that the team may have been bringing prior already in the game. So coming off the bench, you kind of look at it as a way like, okay, we're lacking some energy right now. Let's bring that. Let's pick the starters up and let's pick our whole team up. So it's just kind of like putting yourself in the backseat and really seeing how the team is focusing, how the team is going, and then making a move from there.
Starting the first 32 games or so, obviously there's a conversation between Coach Van Gundy and you before he makes that lineup adjustment. How's your communication with him? It seems like he speaks very fondly of you in the media, of your maturity, and that you act like an older person than your age. How's your communication with Coach Van Gundy, and what's he like as a communicator?
No, our communication is great. I mean, he's when he decided to make the move, it was something that we talked about, and it was good reasoning for it, and I understood where he was coming from at the time where our team was, where we needed some scoring off the bench, and we needed a little bit of a more of a balance. The biggest thing is communication. Some coaches just make moves like that and don't say nothing, but that's kind of the way they go about it. So, we discussed it, and we went from there, and, we just try to make it work. And I think as being a professional and being a player, you just go out there, you play basketball, and you do whatever you can to help your team win, and, that's where I stand.
You were the best player at Half Hollow Hills High School. You're the best player at Tennessee. I think you're the most consistent player and best player for this Pistons club. And yet this team really didn't get to where it expected or wanted to. How do you deal with and define leadership? Because you've been a leader at every spot you've gone. Are you a leader for this team, and how do we recognize that, do you think?
Yeah, well, I definitely look at myself as a leader for our team. One of the leaders for the team, you could say that. I think, we definitely underachieved in where we wanted to this year. I thought, without a doubt, we should be in playoffs and, should be making things happen in the playoffs. So for me and other guys on the team is kind of using the summer as, a time to get better and a time to really come back with a focused mindset of what we need to do to get back where we were, and not to be in this position that we're in come this time next year. So, that's where leadership starts right there, is putting the time in the summer and getting it done. Being a guy that can get our team together and build some early chemistry early on and really get us to be flowing from the start of the season. So, it's a lot of different things that I've been thinking about doing and really just trying to help our team. That's where I'm at. And then on top of that, it's just the work that, you put in day out. I think I look at myself as a guy to lead by example in many different ways of just approaching the game, being a professional, and at the same time doing whatever I can to help us win.
Why do you feel it's so important to give back in the community? You were earlier this year named the Community Assist Award winner. The NBA does that on a monthly basis. What is so near and dear to your heart in that regard?
Well, number one, this is our city. It's where we play. It's where we live for a duration of time, and then our fans and our people, they support us. So for me, it's about giving back to them, but it's about using the platform that you have to make an impact. You score points, you can win games, but at the end of the day, it's about really all the people that come, that you impact, that you change lives with, that you help, and give inspiration to. So that's where it comes from me, is just being able to be that guy that can talk to somebody and help a kid reach his goals one day and understand that he might be going through some tough times now, but just that little bit of inspiration, just that little talk you give them, or that little word of wisdom can help this next generation be very successful in whatever they want to do. So that's where, it comes to heart for me for making an impact.
It's great stuff as always. Always enjoy the conversation. Keep up the great work, not just on the floor for this franchise and this team, but especially in the community. I know a lot of people greatly respect your mentorship and appreciate your leadership in that regard. We look forward to watching you downtown next year. Thanks, Tobias. Have a great summer. We appreciate the time Tobias Harris gave us. Welcome back to Shep Shower and Shave alongside Chad Shepard. I'm Matt Shepard. Let's dive into something that he kind of alluded to regarding Golden State and Cleveland, two teams that will no doubt be in the championship series yet again. And it's not much of a surprise to many people. They've been pretty much the best teams all season long. There are certain ingredients that certain teams need to have in order to get over the hump. We may see Pittsburgh in the NHL in the Stanley Cup Finals yet again as well, trying to become the first team since the Red Wings to have been back-to-back. But there are certain teams that are missing that it factor, that ingredient. The Washington Capitals is one of those teams. The LA Clippers is one of those teams. What is it? What is the mix? What is that cohesiveness that you think they're missing?
Well, it's incredibly difficult to pinpoint Alex Ovechkin. This is the third time in his tenure with Washington that they've been eliminated by Sidney Crosby's Penguins. Now, you look at the two rosters, and we talked the other day about the way they're built, the style they play. Sometimes that has a lot to do with it, but Washington's more than capable. They're a President's Trophy winning team. They've won a lot of games during the regular season. They beat Pittsburgh during the regular season on multiple occasions.
They've got a better roster. Washington has if you look at it on paper, they have a better roster. Kevin Shattenkirk, John Carlson, T.J. Oshie, Kuznetsov, Ovechkin, Holtby. I didn't think they played poorly in Game 7. Do you think it comes down to role players, and is that part of the reason that teams like San Antonio in basketball and Cleveland, to a certain extent, get certain things out of their quote-unquote role players? Washington, L.A. Clippers don't quite get it out of theirs.
I think some of it could be what those role players are asked to do. So we're staying with the Pittsburgh analogy here. We looked at what they did last year in December, firing their coach and bringing Mike Sullivan in. That changed the function to some of those role players. New role players became Brian Rust and players like that who were faster, jumped into the top 9. Washington may be having their role players do something that doesn't maximize their strength. But it's an open-ended question in the sense that there could be a number of solutions, right? It could be a coaching change. It could be a philosophical change. You might need sometimes we've seen things as small and trivial as a uniform change make a difference for a team. Culturally, sometimes it helps people turn the page when you move on from a big franchise player. You change a coach that's been there a long time. Mm-hmm. The Red Wings have certainly turned a page since Mike Babcock has moved on. That's gone the other direction. It's taken them further from getting over that hump. But there's a lot of different ways you can look at it.
Yeah, it's interesting because we bring up role players, and there are guys like you brought up Brian Rust. He had the game-winning goal in Game 7 against Washington in a 2-0 win. Patrick Hornquist had the other goal, and Sidney Crosby had an assist. But we didn't hear a lot of Phil Kessel, who last year was Pittsburgh's darling and probably should have won MVP of the playoffs when it was Crosby, which, that was a completely different debate. Both deserving, but Kessel was unbelievable. Didn't see a lot of him in that series against Washington or make much of an impact. I think the key is over a certain period of time. You don't want it over the length of a season, but at a certain period of time, whether it be playoffs or a crucial stretch to get to the playoffs, certain role players need to play above and beyond. We'll use the Tigers as an example right now. Andrew Romine has played above and beyond right now. Alex Avila has played above and beyond at a certain critical time for this team when the injuries are starting to mount or guys are now starting to get back. Jim Adduci comes up. Who would have ever thought he would have done what he did? John Hicks comes up. Who would have ever thought what he was capable of doing? In the long run, you don't want Jim Adduci or John Hicks or even Andrew Romine carrying your club. You want it to be Justin Upton, Miguel Cabrera, Victor Martinez, Ian Kinsler, and now J.D. Martinez. But during this stretch, even though Detroit was only 500, the impact those role players had on this franchise, on this team, has been the biggest difference and may pay the biggest dividends down the stretch, don't you think?
Right, because that's keeping the Tigers team afloat right now because the superstars aren't playing at that level that you need them to. But what you really need is two things. You need your studs to play like studs, and you need your role players to go beyond that role like you were alluding to. So if you have the role players outperforming their perceived value, that's great. But if you don't have the mainstays, the horses in your stable doing their job as well, then it's kind of a nice story that doesn't really matter a whole lot.
Yeah, we know the greatest players, we've talked about this before, greatest players to have, quote-unquote, never won a championship. If you want to look at Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, John Stockton in the NBA, go right ahead, and certain players in the NHL as well. And then, we bring up way back in the day, the Ernie Bankses of the world, for example, who was a phenomenal player but never won a championship with the Cubs. I wonder if Alexander Ovechkin is getting very close, dangerously close, to the same type of label, same type of reputation. Chris Paul currently carries it in the NBA as well, don't you think?
Absolutely, and I think what hurts Alex Ovechkin even further, coming off the Sochi games not long ago, is that Sidney Crosby's got a couple of gold medals on him as well.
Right.
And I know that comparison is always going to be made.
Is it man-to-man there, you think? Is it Ovechkin, Crosby? Are there certain guys that are going to be compared to one another throughout their careers, like DiMaggio and Williams, for example?
I do think that's the case, especially with these two. They're too close geographically in the same division. They're constantly having playoff battles with each other. If they were at other ends of the country, it might be a little different. If one played for the Bruins and one played for the Kings or something like that, a little tougher to create a rivalry when you might see a team a few times a year.
Outside of Magic and Bird.
Sure,
right.
Absolutely. A little different situation there with two iconic franchises at the time.
So do you think Washington moves on? Do you think the Clippers, I know Doc Rivers has come out and said, look, Chris Paul, we need to keep Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan together. Do you think Washington, do you think this was their last kick at the proverbial can with this lineup and they need to make a major move to shake it up?
I don't think they're going to make a ton of major changes.
Ovechkin's only 31.
I know. I don't think they're going to make a ton of major changes. You saw they felt very close this year. They wanted to shore things up at the trade deadline.
Yeah, they were very close last year too, though.
I'm saying they felt that they didn't need to make enormous changes. I believe they brought in T.J. Oshie at the trade deadline last year. That's a significant change. That changes the look of your top six. Yeah. This year they brought in Kevin Shattenkirk. They made some smaller moves, but they brought in Kevin Shattenkirk was kind of the big signing, so to speak. He didn't even play monster minutes for them. He wasn't their top defenseman. So I think they felt that they were just a few tweaks away. Barry Trotz is a traveled coach who's been deep in the playoffs before, had trouble getting over that hump with Nashville before.
Yeah, but he didn't have this type of talent. He didn't have this type of his Nashville teams never, ever had this type of talent.
My only point is that he's not going to overreact, I don't think. What management will do, I can't say. But I don't think Barry Trotz is going to overreact. He's going to want to take another run with this pretty special group is what he's got.
Well, look, in the words of a Seinfeld episode, something's missing all right. So there's something missing in Washington. And I don't know, it can't be talent. It is a strand of DNA that I can't identify and that maybe nobody can necessarily identify. Or maybe, Chad, maybe it's as simple as that's a bad matchup. Pittsburgh's a bad matchup for Washington. In the NBA, I think for the most part, the best team wins a series. You can't always say that in the NHL, can you? And maybe, just maybe, and I'll tell you, I think Washington's a really good hockey team. I might go so far as to say they might be the second best hockey team in the NHL. The problem is, maybe the best team in the NHL is the team they ran into in round two.
That's absolutely a good point. And we'll see with Ottawa here. I think a lot of people felt we might have been gypped a little bit that Washington and Pittsburgh were really the two best teams in the East, and we had to see them in the conference semifinal instead of the conference final. Mm-hmm. Well, New York's a darn good team, and Ottawa is a really good team, and Erik Karlsson's playing out of his mind right now. Craig Anderson's playing well.
And he's injured, by the way.
Let's see what Ottawa looks like against Pittsburgh before we totally diminish the Capitals. If Ottawa gets swept, maybe Pittsburgh's just playing on another level right now. And I agree with you. It might be a bad matchup for the Capitals, but they did win back-to-back in this series. They were down 3-1 at one point, evened it back up, and brought it to Game 7.
But that doesn't matter.
It's tough to win back-to-backs on a tough matchup if you're going to use that to blame the loss of the series.
But it doesn't matter because in the end, they're at home at the same timeline and the same way that they were last year. And like it or not, fair or unfair, and generally it's unfair, we heap it on the best player. The guy who makes the most money, the guy who is supposed to be the best player, he gets labeled with the guy who can't get them over the hump. And when Alexander Ovechkin scores 2 goals against Pittsburgh last year in a 7-game series loss and scores 2 goals against Pittsburgh this year in a 7-game series loss, that's where all the finger pointing is going to be laid.
That's fair. My only point is that you cannot blame a bad matchup for the Capitals in a series where they won 3 of 6 games at one point. They were split down the middle at one point. That can't be that bad of a matchup for them if they're capable of splitting the first 6 games of the series. Some of it is the mental thing that you talked about, and I totally agree with you on that. The Clippers have become known. They've been branded this way as a team that can't get over the hump, as a team with too much talent and not enough results. That's a tough label to shake when it's everywhere you go around. It's a perception of everyone around you. You almost have to live in your own reality where you are a winner, where you are capable of reaching that conference final until you prove it to everyone else. And once you get there, it's very hard not to turn around and say, well, where are all you now? to the fans.
Well, there are certain teams that have been able to overcome that. I mean, the Kansas City Royals, for example, reached the World Series as a wild card, lost, and then turned around the next year and won it all. I wonder if the Tigers, we will feel the same way about the Tigers as Washington fans feel right now about the Capitals and about Clippers fans feel or LA fans feel about their basketball team. Now, the difference is the Tigers have been to the World Series. The Capitals haven't, with Alexander Ovechkin, been to the Stanley Cup Finals. The Clippers haven't been to the NBA Finals with Chris Paul, and maybe it's just bad timing because Golden State's rise, San Antonio's consistency, Washington in the matchup with Pittsburgh, for example, Tampa Bay obviously jumping in there as well as a very talented team. But I wonder if we'll feel the same way about this Tigers team, that there was, old cliche here, a window of opportunity to seize a moment, and they couldn't seize it. And if that's the case, and we use Chris Paul and Alexander Ovechkin as the examples, who's the example for Detroit?
Well, I believe Miguel Cabrera has been there with Miami, right?
He has, and he won a championship.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can necessarily label it on Miguel Cabrera. Does it fall on Justin Verlander? And that's not necessarily fair either because of how, look at his numbers.
He's been the best during that whole stretch.
No question.
And I was talking with a friend of mine about this the other day. I think we're going to look back on this era, and because I read a ridiculous stat on Clayton Kershaw. He's faced, I think, 189 batters so far this year. Not one of them has gone to a 3-0 count. Mm-hmm. And I was looking back, and I was saying, there are continually guys who push Clayton Kershaw for 1 year. David Price here, Madison Bumgarner here. Yeah. But over a long period and stretch, he's lights out the best lefty in the game. During that same stretch, who's going to be viewed as the best righty? And I think it's Justin Verlander. We're going to look back historically. And it might not be the same exact. Obviously, Verlander started his career a little bit earlier. Kershaw might last a little bit longer. I don't think it's fair to put the getting over the top blames on a starting pitcher, much less one like Justin Verlander, who's really the only reason you made it there probably in 2012.
All right, then I've got the name for you. And it's got to be because he's the architect, and it's Dave Dombrowski.
Yeah.
That's who people in Detroit will blame. They're not going to blame the athlete because of the numbers that we just talked about with Justin Verlander. They're not going to blame the other superstar athlete because he's done it before, so he's already proven us wrong in that regard. It's the guy who assembled the team. That's where most of the blame will lay.
And this is what's going to happen, in my opinion. Boston will win another World Series before Detroit does, with Dave Dombrowski architecting that project as well. Even if you don't agree with that, if that happens where Boston ends up with a couple more during Dombrowski's tenure and Detroit doesn't, it's the same question we've been posing here. If you change the landscape, if Chris Paul goes to another organization, doesn't have to be a top-end organization like the Spurs, can he create positive momentum there? Because in LA, it feels like the ship is going the wrong way and too big to turn around. It feels like a snowball going down a hill that nobody's going to really be able to stop. And the Tigers have become synonymous in this town with taking that run in the playoffs and not being able to get over the hump, getting swept in the World Series. Those are the memories that people have.
Okay, but let's remind everybody this, too. Dave Dombrowski, too, has a ring in 97 with the Florida Marlins. So that's why I think there's a lot of Tiger fans frustrated right now. We feel like, and I'm generalizing here, we feel like we had a chance with almost a mega team. Price, Scherzer, Verlander, right? Sanchez when he was at his peak. Cabrera, Victor Martinez. Guys who have proven track records. Kinsler's brought in. We feel like we had a window of opportunity that extended longer than most people's dreams for most teams. Okay? I'm not saying every team, but most teams. We had guys who actually won it before. Dombrowski won it. Leland won it. Cabrera's won it. And we can't figure out who to blame. We can, because Dombrowski can come back and say, hey, man, I got a ring. Leland can say, I got a ring. Cabrera can say, I got a ring. Verlander can say, look at my stats. The numbers are there. We're not sure who to blame.
Well, I think the problem might be trying to find one person to put on the poster and the Wadden sign and make them pay the duty for it. It's a collective issue, right? Any of those one guys can point to their one ring, but that doesn't absolve them of lack of accomplishment in Detroit. And maybe lack of accomplishment might be a little harsh because we talk in the past about organizations that go 10, 15 years without making the playoffs. And to a certain extent, by getting 2 World Series appearances in that short stretch, we were a little spoiled. So I'm not saying it's not in the fans' it's not smart for fans to expect better or want better or to feel that frustration. It's only natural. But to blame one person is a little bit tough. It's a collective responsibility, and we might, yearn back for those teams in 2012 and 2014. But these guys have moved on. They don't think about that anymore. Maybe when they're retired, they'll think about how good that group could have been. And I think you saw some tweets towards the end of last year when Rick Porcello won the Cy Young, even though Justin Verlander deserved it, and people talked about Scherzer, Porcello, and Verlander and how we could have missed that opportunity. But it's not like Justin Verlander gets off the mound every time and says, man, I wish Scherzer was following me tomorrow instead of Matt Boyd. That's just not the case.
Good conversation, both with Tobias Harris and about the greatest players who, for some reason or another, can't reach the mountaintop.